Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of WP Talks. My name is Shane Miller, and I'll be your host for today's episode in the WP Cares series. I'm joined today by Taylor Biddle. She's a former board member and current advocate at CASA of Galveston County, and Connie Ricketts is the executive director there. CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocate. We're going to learn a little bit more about that. Our involvement with them is because of Selena and Lydia in our Houston and Texas City offices who sit on their board. Connie, I'd like to start with you. If you could maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and your involvement with CASA.
Thank you, Shane, and thank you to Whitley Penn for inviting CASA of Galveston County to be with you today. Yes, I am the executive director, and I've been involved with CASA for more than 20 years in different roles and in different states. But I've been with CASA of Galveston County for about 5 years. And I learned about CASA through my husband and I were foster parents in the state of Texas. And so we cared for children in the foster care system. And one of our children that we ultimately adopted had a CASA. And so the voice that her court-appointed special advocate provided during her time in foster care really touched my heart. And I thought her voice was very different than the voice of a foster parent. And so that's what drew me to learn more about CASA and become involved in the organization.
That's great. And Taylor, if you wouldn't mind maybe giving us a little bit about your background and what drew you to CASA.
So I started out with CASA of Galveston County as an advocate and went through training. And that was about 6.5 years ago. And about a year into that, I was asked to be on the board. So I served my 2 terms on the board and retired from the board in August. And so now I am back to my role as just an advocate, which is plenty. And Connie and I both also work on our fundraising committee. So that's another way we get to help CASA. And my involvement with CASA started when I was super young. My mom had a good friend that she would ride to tennis with, and her friend would tell her, her friend was an advocate, and her friend would tell her about what she was doing with her volunteer job. And I thought that just sounded like the coolest thing, and I couldn't wait to be a grown up and get to do that. And then when I got older, I lived in Lubbock, Texas, and my husband and I had a good friend, and he was very involved with the CASA of South Plains. And he was on their board and did a lot of community outreach for them. And he passed away. And so after that happened, I was like, I really think it's meant to be that I get involved with CASA. And so when my husband and I moved back to Houston, I was up and running with CASA of Galveston County.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that you're just an advocate, and obviously that's no small feat. I'm interested in the process of what it takes to become an advocate. You mentioned some training. Maybe you could describe what that entails and um, what type of role you serve in as an advocate.
Of course. So when I went through the training, which I said was about like 6.5 years ago, I think it looked a little different than it does now. Well, it definitely does with the COVID, but it was basically, I think, about 60 to 80 hours of in-person training, and then maybe 20 hours or so of online training. And then at the end, you would also get to do like go and view the court and how the judge handled the CPS cases. And so now I think they've switched up the way they do the training a little bit, and it may be a little more online and in person. But with being in the pandemic, they've moved to 100% remote training. And so that's kind of changed the way they do things.
Perfect. I think that Connie, maybe I got a little ahead of myself in diving into what an advocate does, but the organization CASA, their primary mission is to, I would assume, train these people and give them some guidance as it relates to serving as an advocate. Maybe you want to expand on how CASA as an organization puts these people in play.
Well, CASA is very critical in the life cycle of a child in foster care, and CASA represents, I believe, what we as community for children. It's what is, I believe, just for them, and is to serve their best interest. And firsthand, every day, volunteers touch and impact lives of children. And through the training, they learn about what brings a family to the child welfare system. And many of our volunteers have not had experiences that they would understand that cycle. But other advocates come because they have been part of that cycle. And that cycle typically involves drug addiction, mental health, untreated, and domestic violence. And so the training represents each one of those areas and how we can support families and foster for them to find their own networks, so that when the child welfare system leaves their life, they are already set up for success. And CASA helps navigate all of that. We know that the child protection system is very large and overwhelming, but for an advocate, they can focus on that one family, that one set of sibling group, or that one child, and they really can get to know them very intimately and look at a bigger picture, because they only have one focus versus
Right.
having many families to focus on.
Give them a
And
little more attention.
yes, for sure. And so the relationships that are found and fostered through advocacy, I think, provide stability. An advocate brings stability to the life of children in foster care. And they learn what it is to have that person that comes and goes, but that person always comes back. And you often hear about in foster care that, the caseworker changes, or this one changes, or that one changes. But the one thing that rarely changes is the CASA. And so that relationship just strengthens over time to where the child or children, and I will give an example. Sometimes children in foster care live in separate placements from their siblings, and an advocate can be a connector to those children who live in different places. And so I think that's really important, to have that same person that knows everyone.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And Taylor, from your perspective, serving in that way, is there any experiences maybe you've had that you'd be willing to share about how being an advocate for a child, you've seen the benefits of it firsthand?
Yeah, definitely. So during my time as an advocate, I've had 2 cases that have closed, and I'm on my 3rd case right now. So I kind of have, what I would call, exciting or heartwarming stories on all of them. And one that comes to mind, my first case, so we're going to call her Rachel. Rachel was a single child in care, and she lived in a foster home in the Houston area. And she was 16, and she was basically disconnected from her entire family. She didn't have any contact with her parents, and she didn't have any contact with the 2 brothers she had. So she went from having a large family to pretty much having nothing. And there were a lot of legal battles with her, and she aged out of care. She luckily was able to live with her aunt towards the end. And so she graduated high school and went on to college. But while I was her advocate, she asked me to come to her theater banquet and be her date. Essentially, they were allowed to either bring like a friend or a boyfriend girlfriend, and out of those options she chose me, which made me feel really good, because I was like, okay, she obviously thinks of me as somebody she can trust. And I think part of that maybe had been built on something that had happened to her when she was in foster care, and she had lived in a foster home with 5 or 6 other girls around her age, all kind of, teenager age. And as they were walking to school one day, because they lived pretty close to the high school, one of the girls that lived in their home was run over by a bus and she died.
Oh no.
And yeah, so she had already been through all these other things. And then this happened. And, I was called almost right away to be told about what had happened. And, her and I went to the funeral together for this little girl. And after that, kind of talked about it because, that left lingering emotions too. Um, so
Wow.
that was, it was horrible that it happened and it was horrible to have to experience, but I was happy that I was at least able to go to the funeral with her and, talk about it later on. And I mean, because it happened right by the house. So it was something that they would
Mm,
revisit constantly.
wow.
Um, I have another kind of interesting story with my second case, who I'm going to call Jessica. Jessica had kind of a turbulent history too, and she was in care as an older female and aged out of care. And when she aged out of care, her biological mom came and picked her up from where she was living, took her to this other state, and luckily, she finished high school as well. And so both of those statistics are a little uncommon with kids that age out of foster care. So I'm 2 for 3, and my other one will hopefully make me 3 for 3. But she lived with the biological mom for a little bit, and then biological mom got tired of the way she was acting and dumped her in a city in Texas.
Mm,
And she didn't have any, she didn't have anything. She didn't have any money. And so she connected with me online and was able to tell me what had happened. And so I was able to set her up with some resources in the area that she was in. And so Jessica and I are still in contact, even though her case closed probably about 2 years ago now. And she's working hard on getting into college. She has a good job with like a well-known company. She has her own apartment. And kids that have aged out of the foster care system, they are given some benefits when it comes to going to college and help paying for those expenses. They just need to take advantage of them. And so her and I still work, every 3 months she'll tell me like, okay, I'm ready, and we'll fill out the FAFSA. I'll help her with that. And they also get these things called ETV vouchers that basically help pay for extra school expenses. And so we've worked on those applications. And so she just needs to pull the trigger and actually take her first college class. But she keeps it on the forefront of her mind. And, I'm still proud of her that she was able to get a good job and be able to live self-sufficiently. And that's still really impressive for a lot of our kids. Um, and then my current case, she's another single teenage girl. So whenever I started being an advocate, I thought, okay, I would love for them to give me a bunch of like little babies, like 5 years old. So they'll want me to paint their nails and they'll
mm.
love me. And then when I got my first teenager, I was like, oh gosh, she's going to be so mad that I even exist. And each one I've just been able to connect with, and it's probably better for me personally and with my skill set anyways, to have, an older girl. But my current girl, she's living in a treatment home or a hospital basically. And so she's had it pretty rough, and she's working on a lot of her personal, when these kids have gone through abuse,
Mm,
they suffer from depression and trauma, and they have a lot of needs that haven't been met. And so trying to undo a lot of this damage can can take a lot of time and specialized help.
yeah.
So she's trying to get that now, and hopefully we'll move forward. And in her case, we've done a lot with trying to find family members that we can connect her with, because right now her parents aren't able to necessarily be those people. So it's looking for other connections that they may have, such as siblings or aunts and uncles, and making sure that they stay connected to them so they still have those bonds.
Yeah.
And CASA has a great program for that I know that Connie could expand on, called CFE, which is how we help locate family members.
Wow. Wow. I know those are heavy topics, and I appreciate you talking about them. It certainly sounds like you're making an impact for the people that you've worked with, and so. But yes, I think Connie, if you wouldn't mind maybe expanding on that program, the CFE.
Yes, I would love to. And I think Taylor brought up a lot of great topics about the experience of the children. And, CFE is one way that promotes healing for children. And um, it's called collaborative family engagement. And really the purpose of it is for children to, just because they're in foster care doesn't mean they have to forget about the neighbor down the street or their best friend in school or, their friend's parents who made them chocolate chip cookies or their cousin that they used to see every Sunday. Just because you're in foster care doesn't mean that you must lose all those connections. In fact, research shows those connections is what sometimes promotes the healing process of what you've experienced. And so what collaborative family engagement does is it goes out and it asks everyone, it asks the parents, who cares about your children? Who do you care about? And the process asks the children, who do you care about? One activity is, if you were to invite anyone to your birthday party, who would you invite? And so sometimes if you ask a child, who's your best friend, they might not be able to answer. But if they're going to have a birthday party, they probably have a laundry list of folks that they would want to invite to their party. And so it's collecting all of those names and relationships and pulling together to find out how, during the time a child is in foster care, how can they stay in contact, support, write a letter for these children. And, for some of our children, those connections today might not be positive connections, but it's still gathering that. So at the point in time where they're ready to make those connections, that information is there for them. And one of the other things that Taylor was mentioning about is, besides collaborative family engagement, there's also areas to improve your knowledge about drug abuse or domestic violence. And in addition to collaborative family engagement, we also have other training opportunities that strengthen advocacy. And so they're topics that expand on the topics that are in your pre-service training, because the more information that you know, the more empowering you can be for families. So we certainly offer that as an extension of, and your requirements as part of being an advocate is to maintain 12 hours of continuing education every year.
Okay. So these are additional trainings to kind of bolster the core learning and make people who are going to be in those service roles a little bit more knowledgeable on some of the topics they're going to encounter.
Yes, and some of those topics vary. So some of them might be to explore further the child welfare system. And so within the child welfare system, especially we work in a certain specific department in child welfare, but there's other areas of child welfare that our children may pass through. And so we should know and understand those other parts of the child welfare system. It will expand on mental health and what are the local resources for those. And it might expand on substance use disorders and drugs impacting our community. Also child development and how the exposure to drugs and alcohol can impact child's development, and navigating education and how to support a family by, increasing their supportive connections, which we talked about. And we also offer, self-care for our volunteers and staff and board members, because this is not easy work. And so it's really important to always step away sometimes.
Yeah.
I know, Taylor, you were thinking of some other opportunities that we offered.
Well, you kind of touched on all of them, but I was just going to say, I personally really enjoy the continuing education opportunities because you can tailor it to your case. I may not do much with like the medical advocacy because I've, never had a case that is where medical advocacy is at the forefront of concerns. But, I know coming up, we have an educational advocacy training, and I signed up for that because, having older youth in care, education is a really big deal, and making sure that they get all the services that they need. So I like the idea of being able to pick what either A, I think is interesting, or B, what's important to my case.
Mhm.
And like Connie mentioned, we've had, different drug trainings that are kind of specific to our area in Texas as well, because there's certain drugs that are more common in certain areas than they are in others. So learning about that is, interesting for your case, but it's also kind of interesting just for what's going on in your community.
Mhm. So you mentioned a little bit earlier that you know this entire process has kind of been turned on its head by the coronavirus pandemic, and so you mentioned training shifting more to online, but um, maybe Connie, you could tell us a little bit about from the organization standpoint, um, how has the pandemic changed the way we fundraise, the way we interact, maybe um, uh, with different folks. Really, what has changed from an operational standpoint for you?
That's a really good question. And, obviously all of us had never, walked into a pandemic before and what that was going to look like for our staff, our volunteers, the children that we served. And so for us, we were kind of remote workers in some way. We would often go to court and work at court one day, or have a visit here. And so we weren't always in the office. But for our volunteers, they visited children every single month in person. And so we kind of had to rethink that. And through our national and Texas associations, they helped us navigate what was child visits going to look like, because we still had to ensure that our children remained safe, that the environments that they lived in, even foster care, was safe. And so we started out with the virtual visits. And so whatever platform families had available, our advocates started there. And then once things became a little, we put protocols in place where you had to wear a mask and social distance and be sure that you were sanitizing. And so we put in advocacy protocols so that our advocates could be safe going back to in-person visits with our families. And one thing that hasn't changed is our court went online. So now our
Mhm.
court is virtual. And so every Thursday, our advocates and staff participate in the court proceedings via Zoom. And so far that has not shifted from the onset of the pandemic last March. But most of our advocates, probably about 50%, have begun to go in-person visits. And then obviously our fundraising has changed a bit. We are navigating those waters a little differently. Although we had some experience with our Child Abuse Awareness Month, we had started doing that about 2 years ago virtually. And this year in December, we held our first walk virtual after 5 years of doing an in-person walk. And so our staff, volunteers and our board has certainly made the shift as they needed to
They really
work in
stepped
this
up.
virtual environment.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Taylor, I know you had mentioned prior to recording the episode today that you had done a gala event. I believe it was in 19, and with hopes to do it in 20, but 20 kind of got derailed. Um, Maybe tell me about where that's at. Is that in the future? Is that something that CASA is going to revisit?
So now we're looking at our No Place Like Home Gala for 2022. 2021 has also been postponed, and we are kind of converting that fundraising effort to a giving campaign slash no show gala, which is kind of a play on don't come and see me, don't come out to this event, don't be in a crowd, and, kind of making light of the situation we're in, but also acknowledging, that we wouldn't want to put anybody at risk or make anybody feel uncomfortable to fundraise with us, and trying to do things that are fun and interactive for our current donors and maybe potential donors and potential advocates to kind of see the way, we help the children in our area. So we're kind of working on that right now. We have a great fundraising team, so everybody's very creative, and we have a lot of ideas on how to make that fun. So
Absolutely.
we're excited about that. And also with visits, my current girl, Courtney, she's actually in Oklahoma, which is what's kind of crazy about the way the CPS system works. So I wouldn't have been able to go and see her regularly anyways, based on distance. So we do phone calls pretty much every day. And then today, though, actually, I got to do a Zoom with her. And so we Zoomed, and it was really fun to be able to, see each other versus just talking on the phone. And something that I thought was a little bit funny was whenever she calls, I have a little kitten currently. He's actually a foster kitten, and he is a baby, and he screams and cries. And I think he does it when I'm on the phone. And so she's always hearing him making all this noise. And so finally today, when we were on camera, I pulled him up and showed her the little kitten, and she was so excited to put a little kitten face with the screaming she always hears. So, and then she got to ask me about my green smoothie, and so it's cool that we can still keep eyes on our kids, even though we're in a pandemic, and even though we're 600 miles away from each other right now.
Yeah.
So luckily we have technology.
There you go. There you go. Well, I wanted to ask a little bit about a couple of things. So for the people in our audience who may be suspicious of abuse, or they're moved by the work that CASA is doing, and they want to get involved, either on a volunteer standpoint, or they want to help out by making a donation. Connie, could you give us some context about where your need is, and then also things to be mindful of, just in general from your experience?
So I'm glad you asked that question. And many of your listeners and people in the community don't know that all community members are mandated reporters. And so you've heard the tagline, see something, say something. Well, it's really true. And so you should call the child abuse hotline number, and I'm happy to give that to you. It's 1-800-252-5400. That's the Texas Child Abuse Hotline, to report any suspicious abuse that you feel might be happening. And this allows the authorities to go out and investigate. And don't be afraid. And I really encourage people to, if they see something, to say something. And, the question always is, how can you get involved? And I think raising awareness, as you all are doing here with the Whitley Penn Cares, and highlighting CASA and nonprofits who need volunteers, but also become a volunteer. And you can find us on our website at casagalveston.org. And there's a volunteer tab, and you can sign up to learn more information by putting in your contact. Or if you know about CASA and you're ready to sign up, there's also a link to an application. And so that's kind of the process. We have information sessions that tell you a little bit about the process, and you can find those on Facebook and also on our webpage. And then you fill out an application, and then there's a personal interview, and we have to have references. And as Taylor mentioned, there is the pre-service training. And as she mentioned, some of it was online, and it still is. You have pre-work before you come into class. And then, like she said, we still do court observation, and that's still part of the process. And then we also have post-training interviews. And, a CASA is a very powerful role in our child welfare system and in the court system. And you have to be sworn in to be a guardian ad litem in our court. And so our judge swears in our advocates after they've completed all of their training requirements and all their background checks. And then the other part is, our advocates are required to write court reports and, stand up in court and actually speak to the best interests, both in writing and in person. Well, verbally, not in person right now, but eventually we will be back in person. And so if that's something that fits who you are, sign up to be an advocate or tell someone who you believe would make a great advocate. And Texas CASA, our state association, has a program called Nominate a CASA. It's someone that you believe, has, has the heart for our work. And then obviously to give. And also on our webpage, there's ways to give. You can give, make a donation. You can participate in our, our giving events, our fundraisers. There's Amazon Smile. There's lots of ways to give.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Amazon Smile's great. I've used that feature before. We'll be sure to share both the child abuse hotline and your website whenever we post this episode so that people can visit the website to volunteer, make donations. We're doing this over Zoom, and I'm looking in Connie's background, and she's got this great big sign that says "The best is yet to come." And I feel like that should be the motto of CASA, because it truly feels like you give people hope, and you're really a guide to get them through some tough times. So that's great. I know that not next month, but April is Child Abuse Awareness Month. So I know you're going to have some giving campaigns and really a push to highlight what's going on there. So if you're listening to this, pay attention for that. Get involved to the extent you're called to do that, and have the wherewithal and the heart for it. So I'd like to close out our episode and thank our guests. Sincerely appreciate you guys coming on our episode, and we're so grateful to have folks like you in the communities that you serve. It sounds like you're doing a great job. We are going to conclude this episode of WP Talks. This is the WP Cares series. And until next time, take care.
Oh.